Welcome and welcome back to Hell Month. This is episode 6, and let me tell you, episode 7 on Friday and then episode 8 on Halloween are two crazy stories, and you're gonna want to make sure to subscribe so you get notified when they pop up. So today, make sure to find the hidden clue and put what it is with the timestamp in the comments to enter the giveaway. Also, amazingly, we got over 80 likes on our last story. That's definitely a first, but hopefully not a last. So let's aim to get 60 likes on today's story. And I know y'all can do it. Just share it around to your social medias, whether you have Facebook or on Reddit. If you have Reddit, please share it there. I believe in you. Okay. So, without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Michael Benjamin Sams made an extremely unlikely monster. The man of slight build and his black framed glasses were perched on the bridge of his nose. He had craggy skin, testifying to a life lived outside, and that familiar sun-weathered look of someone with endless stories to tell. And in place of one leg was an artificial limb, a device he had reluctantly grown used to since his amputation, which happened to him in the 70s and left him with the slightest limp when walking. But beneath his mild exterior was a hidden, competitive past as a middle-distance runner and thrice married of 2 father. Now, all this made him someone hard to imagine in the category of being someone to fear. The calm, composed facade that Sams projected was deceptive. Beneath the surface lurked a malevolent monster. And in the past, he had managed to pull the wool over the eyes of the Yorkshire police fraud squad with his clever insurance con involving stolen vehicles. But his subterfuge had been uncovered and resulted in him spending time in prison. Now, however, Sams had cooked up an even more wicked plan, which involved kidnapping young women and demanding ransom money for their safe return. The authorities, he realized, were not willing to negotiate when human lives were on the line. That's why on Tuesday the 9th of July 1991, Sams drove to Chapelton's red light district in Leeds and picked up an inexperienced prostitute named Julie Dart. And being new in the business meant that she wasn't as cautious or aware as more seasoned street workers would have been. And the man behind the wheel looked harmless enough with his glasses and his smile, so when he proposed that they move things to his nearby workshop, she agreed without much thought of it, and it would end up being a fatal error. Julie felt her body go rigid as the man's overpowering hands just grabbed her, pulling her arms behind her back and binding her wrists together with rope. And then he gagged her tightly as she grasped for air, pushing a cloth into her mouth before tugging at the hem of her shirt. And now naked, she was forced onto the ground and shoved into a large plastic garbage bin. And then she heard the sound of these chains clanking against the sides of the container as it was laid on the side, locking her in. Fear filled her chest as he warned at any movement if she moved, it could result in a deadly electrical shock. But Julie knew that she had to escape, no matter what it took. So with blood pounding in her ears and her muscles coiled like a spring under the chains that bound her limbs, she waited until she heard Sam's footsteps and his monstrous breathing slowly recede into the distance. Her eyes now were slit with determination, and Julie began to writhe and squirm, finally managing to break free of the shackles that held her captive. A sense of triumph surged through her, only to be quickly replaced by raw terror as she desperately fought to pry open the heavy lid imprisoning her. But then she finally emerged from the confines of her makeshift coffin. Julie lay there gasping on the dusty concrete floor for several moments before daring to raise her head and glance around the silent darkness. With every instinct alert for danger, she tensed herself for any sign of movement, but nothing was there. Just an eerie silence enveloping from all sides. She fully expected the hum of the engine to get closer any moment, but there was nothing but silence. But Julie also cursed at her luck, because the garbage bin had been easy enough to escape from. But the workshop door, however, was tightly bolted shut, and she used all of her strength to hurl herself at the garage door, managing to send a sharp jolt of pain through her shoulder with each attempt. And then just as she was lunging forward for another try, Julie heard a loud crunch of tires on the pavement and her heart sank. He was back. Too late for any course of action other than desperation. Julie then scrambled across the floor, fell to her knees, and plunged back into the confines of the bin, desperately trying to hold the lid shut with her ankle alone. She heard the garage door swing open and keys then rattle in the lock. That's when the fluorescent tubes flickered on, and she knew he was back. Without a word, he dragged her out of the box and threatened her with a hammer. He then secured the chain around her wrist and tethered it to a roof truss before leaving her alone in the frigid workshop for the night. The worst was yet to come for Julie Dart. Unbeknownst to her, her near escape had unnerved her captor. Because until then, he was uncertain about what he actually planned to do with her. But now his mind was made up. And the next day, he returned to the workshop and ordered Julie to write a note demanding £140,000 from her boyfriend as ransom. And then, in his hand, he grasped a hammer, the same one that he'd used to threaten her the night before, and he ruthlessly swung it against her head until she laid lifeless on the ground, a pool of blood with exposed brain matter and broken bones surrounding her. The brutality of Sam's murder was palpable. We can only assume that he knew Julie's boyfriend wouldn't be able to pay him the money he wanted, and that this calculated act was done to scare the police and make them take notice of his threats. For 9 days, until he left Julie's remains near Grantham in Lincolnshire, the murderer led the police on an arduous, wild goose chase. First, he sent a letter to lead CID detailing his demands that had to be met or else Julie would perish. And then after that, his directive for the officers were to stand watch at Birmingham New Street Station and wait for him to call. But all they heard was static when the phone finally rang. The next day brought another letter, teasingly mocking their inability to capture him. Then, the next day, once the police found Julie's body, he then changed his angle of attack and promised to hunt down other women if authorities didn't fork out a ransom. "Street workers are easy to pick up," he warned, "and I won't spend any more time in prison for killing 2 instead of 1. But now he was getting no response to these warnings, so he began to call major supermarket chains threatening to poison food items unless he was paid a ransom. He also called the British Rail and threatened to derail a commuter train unless they paid him £200,000. Now, the police had begun to recognize a trend in the calls, which were mostly made from public phones located on train station platforms. Julie's body had also been found beside the tracks, and police officers had been sent to New Street Station to await a phone call. Police suspected a railway worker as their suspect, but Sam's ran an ailing power tools company instead. But he was an avid train spotter. He was obsessed with all things rail related. It was said he knew every mile of track in the Midlands and Yorkshire. The rail network would play a major role in his next crime. Stephanie Slater was a rookie real estate agent working for the Shipways Company. And as the fresh face of the agency, Stephanie drew the short straw once again when Bob Southwall called to view a dilapidated house in the seedier parts of Perry Beaches. Little did she know that seemingly innocuous middle-aged man was actually the letter-writing killer of Julie Dart, who every police officer in the Midlands had been tirelessly searching for. And as soon as they entered the property, he yanked out a knife with a menacing growl and bound her hands tightly while stuffing a cloth into her mouth before dragging her into his car. Stephanie was then shoved into the trunk and driven to a remote workshop. With no regard for his own safety, Sams even stopped at a train spotters meeting on the way, providing himself with an alibi. That's pretty smart. The same afternoon, he called Stephanie's boss, Kevin Watts, and demanded a ransom of £175,000, threatening dire consequences should he involve police. But the real estate manager paid no heed and summoned forces from West Midlands and Yorkshire, who set up a task team to secure her release. And they were given some hope when Sams called Stephanie's parents, playing them a recording of her voice, indicating that she indeed was still alive. And in the days following, the details of the drop were sorted out. Sams was very meticulous with his directions. He wanted only $10 bills, $20 bills, and $50 notes to be present, all bundled up in plastic wrappings with a thickness of no less than 120 microns. Watts was chosen to make the delivery himself, and it goes without saying that the police had to stay away from the scene. The money had to go into a gym bag and then sit on a tray that Watts would find on a railway bridge situated on the outskirts of Barnsley in Yorkshire. This location was very close to a billboard advertising Shipway real estate agents, which seems to be another way for Sams to have a laugh at the police's expense. Nevertheless, over 1,000 officers from 6 different forces waited by, some undercover and keeping an eye on every possible exit route from the area. Now, if the kidnapper showed up trying to pick up his reward, he would surely be caught. But again, Sams was one step ahead. He attached a tray to an extended length of thick fishing line and instructed Watts to place the ransom money on it. Then, as soon as Watts released the bag, Sams pulled the cord and the bag, then plummeted 60 feet down towards the railroad tracks below. Now, with remarkable agility, Sam snagged the bag while still in midair, then hopped onto his off-road motorcycle and escaped under the cover of a dense mist. And the police faced harsh criticism for their dismal failure in apprehending him. But in fairness, Sams did follow through with his side of the deal. After getting the ransom, Michael Sams drove Stephanie to Birmingham and let her go not far from her parents' house. He vanished into the night, perhaps thinking of his next venture. 8 days after being taken away by him, Stephanie Slater was freed with no physical harm done to her, though psychologically she had endured plenty. Much of those days in captivity were spent locked in a plastic garbage can and was threatened with death should she flee. And differently from Julie Dart, Stephanie took those threats seriously and followed every order given to her, as well as trying to humanize herself by engaging Michael in conversation. And this is when Mystery Files came in and said, wow, this is some incredible high-level shenanigans going on. I mean, this guy is either a mastermind genius when it comes to getting away with things, or the police department was just a little bit sluggish when trying to get this case done. I mean, how are you just going to let him ride off into the sunset with all that money? If you want there to be an ending to the story, then subscribe right now, because there is one thing I forgot to tell you. Okay. After 3 days of Stephanie's imprisonment, the captor gave in and stopped confining her to the little box. He did not try to hide his identity from her either. Stephanie took this opportunity to supply his image in her mind, and then put it to a police artist with an accurate picture. When this sketch was broadcasted on BBC Crime Watch, it was quickly recognized as Sam's. And it was Susan Oak, Sam's first wife and mother of his 2 boys, who called the cops and led them to him. And upon searching his home and workshop, a lot of evidence came forth, including a curtain drenched in Julie Dart's blood. Confronted with the irrefutable facts indicating his culpability, Sams desperately attempted to redirect the attention by fabricating a co-conspirator he claimed was the true murderer of Julie Dart. but he was unable to present either a name or any corroborating proof that this individual even existed. And in the end, Sams was convicted of murder, abduction, and extortion, and handed 4 life sentences. And as a side note, several years later after her abduction, Stephanie Slater published a book in which she claimed that Sams had sexually assaulted her on the first night that she was prisoner. Sams denied this and, with typical gall, instructed his attorney to file charges of libel against the woman that he'd terrorized. Those charges were dismissed out of hand. Thank you so much for watching episode number 6 of Hell Month. I really appreciate all of you. Let's get this up to 60 likes, and I hope you all have a great day. I'll see you on Friday. Cheers.